The Nintendo Switch has quickly become a sales powerhouse since its launch in March of 2017. And I can't say I'm surprised. It combined the best aspects of Nintendo's handheld and home console divisions, creating a device that, until recently, offered a hybrid experience you couldn't really get anywhere else. In the wake of that massive success, it's only natural that Nintendo would want to pump out as many games as possible for the toaster, and that's exactly what they did, for better and for worse. It's no secret that a good chunk of first-party Switch titles are remasters or ports of existing Nintendo games. On its own, that idea is pretty solid. Nintendo has been around since the dawn of modern gaming, so it only makes sense to dip into that back catalog and give certain games a new chance at life. While some of these remasters turned out stellar, being by and large the best way to experience said games, others were not so lucky. Today, I want to take a deep dive into the world of Nintendo Switch remasters, and highlight the ones that are worth picking up, and which ones are a waste of time. In other words, let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the funky. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know by now that Nintendo's last home console, the Wii U, was a massive failure. While it had an interesting gimmick in the form of the gamepad, it failed to set itself apart from its predecessor, the Wii, and as such confused the general public on what the thing actually was. Despite having some of Nintendo's most innovative and interesting games, the system barely managed to sell 13 million units by the end of its short 5-year run. So when the Switch came out swinging in early 2017, it only made sense to bring some of its best titles over. And when I say some, I mean practically all of them. Most of these Wii U ports have the bare minimum done to them to justify double dipping. Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is a rather infamous example, as they only added one new character in the form of Funky Kong. He has all of the abilities of every partner Kong in the game, and as such is impervious to pretty much every obstacle in the game, barring bottomless pits. He also has 5 hearts, cause why not? Funky Kong is basically the equivalent of using every action replay code at once. While I don't really mind his addition on its own, this is the only addition to the game barring some improved graphics and load times, which is far from being worth full price in most people's eyes, especially considering the game was going for less than $20 just a year prior. In a similar vein, new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe does the same exact thing, but arguably worse. This version of the game adds Toadette and Nabbit as playable characters. Unless you use a hidden cheat code, these characters replace one of the Toads from the original game, which wouldn't be an issue if these characters weren't busted as all hell. Nabbit is literally impervious to damage, and playing as Toadette gives you access to the Super Crown, which allows you to dodge instant kill obstacles such as lava or bottomless pits. In single player mode this is whatever, since you can just pick whatever character you want, but if you want to play with 4 people, at least one person has to pick one of these characters, which just gives them a clear advantage. It's baffling to me that a game centered around its multiplayer would give some of its players an unfair advantage like that, especially considering a lot of the fun in this game comes from dicking each other over, which is a lot harder to do with these 2 characters. Other than that, the port includes the Luigi expansion from the original game, which again is nice, but a version with both included was already on the Wii U, so it would have been nice to see a little bit more included for those double dipping. That's not to say all these Wii U ports are disappointing. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe launched around the same time as the Switch and included all the DLC from the original game. It even got a revamped battle mode, since the one included in the original is basically non-existent. Just recently, it's gotten even more DLC in the form of the Booster Pass, which is looking to add more cups filled with old and new courses, as well as new playable characters. While it still might not be worth full price to some people, I'm willing to give it a pass since it was a launch title, and what better game to show off the appeal of the Switch than a Mario Kart game. I know I've gotten more than my fair share of value out of this game. It also helps that this game sells literally millions of copies each year, which is still insane to me. Another notable example would be Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. This version of the game includes all of the content from every version of Hyrule Warriors, including the DLC from both the Wii U and 3DS versions of the game. The base game has hundreds of hours of content on its own, so adding even more on top of that is an insane value. It's also nice to be able to play the 3DS content at more than 15 frames per second. The last Wii U port I really want to focus on is Super Mario 3D World. The original game was a big reason why I wanted a Wii U back in the day, so I was really happy to see it given new life on the Switch. The game saw numerous improvements, such as the removal of touch controls and the overall increase of the game's speed. It's a joy to run around these levels as fast as possible and screw over your friends in multiplayer. This version of the game includes a new side mode in the form of Bowser's Fury, which is basically a tech demo for a pseudo-open world Mario game. While it's pretty short due to the nature of it being a side mode, its ideas and additions to the traditional Mario formula are phenomenal, and it even has giant kaiju fights with Bowser, which is really cool. I've seen a lot of people say this mode is worth the price of admission alone, and while I don't fully agree with that sentiment, it can't be denied that the package overall is filled to the brim with quality content. While other Wii U ports were released over the years, they all follow the same basic structure of the ones I've already highlighted. Pretty much all of them are straight ports with a few new pieces of content. Not really a whole lot to write home about. A couple of games got pseudo-sequels, such as Splatoon 2 and Mario Maker 2, but as such they do more to set themselves apart from their originals, so I don't want to go too in-depth with them here. So, with that being said, let's move on to something a little more divisive. While Nintendo ended up porting pretty much all of their first-party Wii U titles over to the Switch, that's not all they ended up porting over. They also remade a decent number of games from the ground up. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening was remade for the Switch in 2019. The entire game was remade to look like miniature dioramas, which is a really cool art style choice. It's not one-to-one with the original Game Boy game either. The game almost doubles the amount of heart pieces and seashells in the game, which helps keep Link's Awakening veterans on their toes. While it's a solid remake overall, there's a lot of things that are holding it back from being my favorite version of the game. For example, they removed a few of the side quests and nerfed a few of the items, namely the boomerang. A new side mode was introduced in the form of a dungeon maker, which on paper is really cool, but in practice there's only so much you can do with the pieces the game provides you. And after a while, the dungeons you make feel cookie cutter and tedious. This wouldn't matter as much if there weren't collectibles like heart pieces locked behind this mode, meaning you have to grind a certain amount of these rather mindless dungeons to get everything in the game. This is probably more of a personal thing, but I feel like a certain charm was lost with the art style change in the remake. The original wasn't exactly the pinnacle of realism, but it felt more like a limitation of the Game Boy rather than a stylistic choice. Again, it's not that the game looks bad, I just prefer the sprite art of the original a little more overall. Regardless of my personal feelings, this is a solid remake, and captures a lot of what made the original great, while also being its own thing. I definitely recommend this one to any Zelda fan who still hasn't tried it. Sticking with Zelda for just a little bit longer, in 2021 Nintendo released Skyward Sword HD, which has quickly become my favorite version of the game. Skyward Sword was actually my first Zelda game, and while it's not exactly a fan favorite nowadays, I still really love the game, even with all of its faults. This port doesn't add anything in the realm of new content, however it does a lot to improve the overall experience from the original Wii game. For starters, the graphics have seen a nice overhaul, and the frame rate has been bumped up to 60 FPS. So the game looks fantastic and runs smooth as butter. The amount of tutorials were cut down significantly, and the game even offers a traditional control scheme along with the original motion controls. While they aren't as intuitive as I'd want them to be, it's nice to have them there as an option for people who don't like the motion controls or prefer to play in handheld mode. Overall, this is an extremely solid remaster, and by far the best way to play the game in the modern day. You'd think with it being their flagship franchise, Mario would get an insane remaster that would make all the previous versions obsolete. This is also Nintendo we're talking about, so you would have thought wrong. Released in late 2020 to celebrate Mario's 35th anniversary, Super Mario 3D All-Stars is a compilation of Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy for the Switch. I hesitate to even call this a remaster, as most of these games barely have any improvements over the original whatsoever. 64 in particular is a fundamentally worse version of the game, as it's based off a Japanese-only re-release that patched a bunch of bugs and changed some voice lines. Most notably, this version patches the backwards long jump, or BLJ for short, which is a popular glitch used for speedrunning. This version of the game does have Rumble Pack support though, so... Super Mario 64 is arguably the single most influential game of all time, and the BLJ is a huge factor as to why speedrunning is as big of a thing as it is now. It feels incredibly tone-deaf to basically remove a part of your game, intentional or not. That's a huge part of its legacy for an anniversary collection. Super Mario Sunshine didn't fare much better. It's rendered in widescreen now, but unfortunately this leads to some weird performance dips that aren't in the original game. The cutscenes were also AI upscaled and look kind of off because of it. Super Mario Galaxy is the only game in the collection to get a full-on upgrade. Not only is it rendered in 1080p, but it also has full button control on top of the traditional motion-oriented ones. The collection offers very little content outside of the actual games, aside from including the OSTs from each game, which is incredibly disappointing considering the amount of quality collections we've gotten in the past few years, most of which are a fraction of the price. What makes this whole package even stranger is that it was a limited release. I'm not talking about a really small print run or something. No, they straight up delisted the game after a few months. I genuinely can't think of a good reason to do this, especially considering it's really easy to go to a retail store and still find a copy. Overall, 3D All-Stars is a pretty lacking collection, and it's really sad to see this be the big celebration for Mario's 35th anniversary. But enough negativity. Recently, we've gotten some of the best remasters that the system has to offer. Earlier this year, Nintendo released Metroid Prime Remastered, which is a complete graphical overhaul from the original GameCube game. Not only does it include the pointer controls from the Wii version of the game, but it also has standard button controls and even supports the GameCube controller if you have an adapter. Not only is this by far the best way to play the game, but it was also released cheaper than a majority of the other remasters on the system, and it was also shadow dropped out of nowhere during a Nintendo Direct, which caught many people off guard. I think my favorite remaster from Nintendo is probably Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. I played the hell out of this game with my brothers back on the Wii, so it was awesome to see it come back on the Switch with new content. Like other remasters, the game has seen a massive overhaul in the graphics department, and I think this might be one of my favorite looking Switch games. I love the dark outlines and all the characters and how colorful everything is. It really makes the game pop. They changed DDD's design to be more in line with his Forgotten Land counterpart, which I really like, even if it does look a little doofy at times. This version of the game adds two new side modes, Merry Magoland and Magolor Epilogue. Merry Magoland is basically a collection of minigames, some new and some returning from previous games. Each subgame has a set of missions you can complete, and by playing each subgame and completing missions you earn stamps. Stamps are used to fill out these stamp cards, which give you souvenir items and masks for your characters. While I'm not a huge fan of the souvenir items, since they can be used to break the game balance, I think the masks are a cute addition, and you can even take them into the main game, which is really cool. While I dig this mode a lot, I can see it being pretty hit or miss for most people. If you don't really care about the subgames in Kirby, there's not really an incentive to play this mode outside of completion and the cosmetics, which I guess can be either a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you ask. Either way, it's harmless, and I'd rather it be here than not. The Magolor Epilogue is where the real meat and potatoes of this remaster is. For those who aren't Kirby lore masters like myself, Magolor is a character introduced in this game, whose ship has crash-landed on Popstar, and he asks Kirby and his friends to help repair his ship. After doing so, he does what any best friend would do and take you to his home planet, which just turns out to be a burning hellscape, and asks you to kill a dragon. You know, just bestie shit. Afterwards though, he kinda sorta betrays you, and becomes a demon or something. So Kirby does what any best friend would do and fucking kills him. After his defeat, Magolor is sucked into another dimension, where this epilogue side mode takes place. Kirby sucked all of Magolor's power away along with his color after defeating him. So in this mode, Magolor is tasked with finding these fruit fragments to restore said powers. The best way I can describe this mode is Kirby combined with DMC. When you attack enemies, you build up a combo meter, and you get a certain amount of magic points depending on how high you can build it up in quick succession. Using said magic points, you can upgrade Magolor's skills and gain a variety of abilities, such as more health, longer levitation time, and even extending the amount of time your combo stays active. At the end of each stage, you're ranked depending on how many magic points you earned. So you're incentivized to maintain high combo counts to get the maximum number of points. You can collect floating magic points to extend your combo timer, and most enemies take multiple hits to defeat, so you can stretch out your combo if needed. This extends to the bosses as well, which makes it a really interesting balancing act of avoiding and dealing damage to get a really high combo. Getting massive combo counts is exhilarating, and only becomes easier as you level up more abilities. Each boss rewards you with new skills, but I felt that a lot of these were kinda superfluous. Abilities such as the dimension shift and the spike move aren't used very often, and in my opinion ruin the flow of a stage when you have to use them. In traditional Kirby fashion, the boss is an eldritch abomination, and it even ties into one of the side games that was released on the Switch a few years ago. It's really dumb, but I live for this kind of shit. Overall, I really enjoyed this mode, and it adds some sorely needed post-game variety to an already banger game. That about covers all the remasters I wanted to talk about. While there are definitely others I could look at, like the Pokemon remakes or the various third-party ones, they're all pretty much the same as the other titles I've already talked about. They usually look prettier and add a few new pieces of content, barring a few exceptions. There's been a lot of debate over whether or not Nintendo is becoming a lazy company that only releases their old games for full price, but I don't really see it that way. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of releases that skirt that line. Tropical Freeze, for example, is hard to justify when Nintendo themselves were selling it for only $20 just months before the port launched. But in general, I think the pricing is fair. Obviously, pricing is a pretty subjective thing, but I don't think a game's age should determine how valuable it is. It's not like this is a Last of Us Part 1 situation. A lot of these games get tangible benefits for being on the Switch. I think just being on the Switch is a pretty big selling point on its own, since you can take it with you and play these games in handheld mode wherever you want. In the case of these Wii U ports, I'm very happy they exist, since they give these fantastic games another chance to flourish. If it wasn't for these ports, games like Captain Toad and Pikmin 3 would be left to rot on the Wii U, and that would just be a damn shame. Even with how disappointing stuff like 3D All-Stars was, especially compared to other contemporary anniversary collections, it's still a collection of some of the best collectathons ever made, and with how expensive these games and their respective consoles are becoming, I'll gladly spend $60 on one package with them all included. As long as Nintendo lets me anyway. God, what were they thinking? I think it's important to remember that the gaming community at large is just a small part of the target audience for these ports. I see a lot of people say, oh well, just buy the Wii U version, it's cheaper. And 1, only 3 people have a Wii U, that's why these games bombed in the first place. And 2, these consoles and games are becoming more and more expensive and harder to come by as time goes on. Despite my gripes with some of these releases, I don't think many of them are outright bad, and at the end of the day they serve to introduce these games to a new audience, and it's clearly working judging by the sales numbers. Overall, I think these remasters are here to stay for the foreseeable future, and I'm glad to see more and more of these older games get a newer chance at life. Just please, for the love of God, Nintendo, port the HD Zelda remasters. I need these, please! Hey, thanks for making it this far into the video. This is a little different than the stuff I normally make, but it was really fun stepping out of my comfort zone for this one. Sorry if things have been a little slow recently. I'm nearing the end of my college degree, so things have been pretty busy, but hopefully I can get a little more consistent going forward. The next video is going to be on Kingdom Hearts 1. The KH series is one of those that's near and dear to my heart, so I'm going to take my time with this one and try to do it justice. Other than that, I'm going to start chipping away at a Xenoblade Chronicles video as well. I wouldn't expect it anytime soon due to the nature of this kind of game, but I am going to start working on it in the background to get it out sooner rather than later. I want to get it out by the end of the year, but no promises on that one. That's about it for me. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for video updates and general shitposts. Thanks again, have a great one.